There you go.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is Rachel Tyle. She's the Executive Director of...
Director of Legal Services. She just gave me a promotion.
At Exodus Refugee in Indianapolis.
Yep.
And she's spoken to us many times, so glad to have her back. And you're an Indianapolis resident, yep?
Yeah,
So
born and raised, yep.
So,
Yep.
she can give you more about her, what she does, and all that. I just want to give you one note, make sure that, I think you all stand up for photo when you came in, but if you didn't, make sure you do that. And if you have any trouble, email Courtney, because she's kind of the one that can navigate around things. So,
Sure.
welcome to Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I was here last year. I forget how in the middle of nowhere this is. I was like, where am I? Oh, right, the middle of nowhere. So like Kathy said, I'm Rachel Van Tyle. I'm the Director of Legal Services, not the Executive Director yet. Maybe I'll tell my boss that she gave me a promotion. But I am an immigration attorney. I've been doing it over 10 years. My whole career has been in the nonprofit sector. So I spent it's been 13 years. I've spent the first 10 years at a nonprofit in Indianapolis called the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. I've spent the last 3 years working at Exodus Refugee Immigration, really building a new immigration program there, so there wasn't really one. I started in March of 21, and if you'll recall of that year, August of 21, Afghanistan falls apart. So I've spent the majority of the last 2 years, most of our legal services have been Afghan related. But today I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about refugee services, refugee processing, and then we're gonna end up talking about specific family reunification options for, I gotta watch my line too, because I can't go too far this way. I told him I was a walker. We're gonna end up talking about refugee and asylee family reunification options. So the way I like to teach is if you have a question, you're probably not the only one, go ahead and raise your hand. The first time you ask a question, if you'll just like tell me who you are and where you're from, that'd be helpful for me to just kind of get a sense of the room. So let me talk to you about my organization as kind of an example of what refugee resettlement orgs are. So Exodus has this mission statement dedicated to the protection of human rights by serving the resettlement needs of refugees and other displaced people fleeing persecution, injustice, and war by welcoming them to Indiana. So we're going to talk about the different services that that Exodus provides, but also just generally kind of what it means to be a refugee. Who here is familiar with the definition of a refugee? Okay, so don't worry, we're going to go over it. Just a little bit more background about us. We were founded in 1981 after the Mariel boat lift of Cubans, the first Afghanistan 2021, 40 years before the Mariel boat lift of Cubans was the last mass exodus of, pun sort of intended since we're called Exodus, but mass exodus of immigrants from another country to the United States. Prior to that was the Vietnamese refugees coming out of post-Vietnam War. We started with a group of volunteers that were working out of their church basement, and now we've grown to an organization. When I started, it was 25 people. We're now 75 people, and I started 2.5 years ago, so we've really grown. We also have an office in Bloomington, Indiana, where we welcome refugees to that area as well. So a refugee is someone who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for their race, their religion, their nationality, their membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion, is outside the country of his or her nationality and is unable or unwilling to return to that country. Does that definition sound familiar to anyone? Because it's the asylee definition, right? So the difference between a refugee and an asylee or somebody seeking asylum is where that designation is made. A refugee designation is made outside the United States, typically by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR. An asylee can only, under US law, an asylee can only meet that definition once in the geographical confines of the United States, notwithstanding this administration and previous administrations' attempt to make them apply for asylum outside of the United States. That's not possible. So the United States is a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention, so that's where we get the definition. The This was created in a post-World War II response to really what should have been refugees coming from Germany and other places who were unfortunately not allowed to enter the United States. If you don't know, Anne Frank and her family attempted to come to the United States and were not allowed in. Should have been let in as refugees, but we weren't yet a signatory to the convention, nor were the refugee protocols set up. Okay, so let's talk about refugees globally. There's 108.4 million forcibly displaced people in the world. So that means they can't be in their home area or country. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not in their home country, but they're not in their home area. And they're displaced because of conflict, like war. Sometimes it can be natural disaster, things like that. There's a real push for what we call climate refugees. There's a lot of people who cannot be in their home countries anymore because of climate destruction. And so there's a big push to kind of recognize that as potentially a category of refugees. It is not yet recognized. 62.5 million people are what we call internally displaced, meaning they're inside their country of origin, but they're not in their home area. So maybe they're from the Congo and they're from Nord Kivu, but they are living in Kinshasa, the capital of Congo. That is an internally displaced person. Less than 1% of all of these refugees will be referred for resettlement in the United States or any other country. And more than 41% of all refugee seekers are children. Okay, so I just want to talk about where we see refugees from in Indianapolis in our agency. Now, this was our highest year ever. That's why we keep it. We welcomed that year almost 1,000 refugees, 947. This was the last year of the Obama administration when the refugee presidential determination was at 125,000. Trump takes office and he drops the number to like 60. The last year of his presidency, it's 15,000, which means that's the total number of refugees they can admit to this country. Normally, we don't get anywhere near the actual top number, 125. We are anticipating it being 125. The fiscal year starts 10/1. The president has still not yet signed the presidential determination, so I was hoping to come in here and be like, in FY24, it's going to be 125, but we don't know because he hasn't signed it yet. I have a feeling it's a political move regarding both the budget and the crisis at the border. So that year, you can see we welcomed 6 from China. I don't know if you can see this very well. We welcomed 556 individuals from Burma. Indiana has the largest population of Burmese refugees in the world outside of Southeast Asia. So significant populations in Indianapolis and also in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is, for those of you not from here, about 2.5 hours, 2 hours north of Indianapolis, northeast. So our second biggest group that year was individuals from Democratic Republic of the Congo, and that continues to be our largest growing group, with the outliers of the Afghans in 21. So you'll see in 21, which was FY21 is 10/1/20 to 9/30/21. We actually didn't have that many, 131, because that was the last year, kind of the end of Trump's term, and they didn't raise the number initially. So we only had 131, as you can compare that to nearly 1,000 in 2016. FY22, you can see that we welcome, well, you probably can't see, but I'm going to tell you that this says that we welcomed 398 individuals from Afghanistan that year as part of our yearly number, 213 individuals from Democratic Republic of the Congo, and for the first time, 2 individuals from Honduras. So we are starting to see more Central Americans come. This year, my agency's on pace to hit about 650. Majority are from the Congo, but we also see Syrians and Eritreans and Burmese and Guatemalans and Hondurans this year. We have not yet seen any from Venezuela. We have not yet, because the refugee pipeline takes so long. We're talking about 15, 20 years. It'll be a while before we start to see some refugees come in from Venezuela. Okay, questions about that, just about numbers or countries or anything like that? I think, let me look at this. Okay, with the exception of Eritrea, there's a person on my staff that speaks languages from every one of these countries, which is pretty cool. So we have language diversity on staff. We have a lot of refugees that we hire to be part of our team, so we're lucky that way. So we have nobody that speaks Tigrinya, but that would be great if you know, or if you want to learn real quick and become a volunteer, that'd be great.
They work at Tyson.
Oh, right. We have plenty of clients who speak Tigrinya. I just have no staff members. But okay, so if you've never thought about life in a refugee camp, I had somebody say this week to me regarding the border crisis, well, why don't we just set up a camp in the United States? And I wanted to be like, the last time we did that, Japanese internment camp, didn't go real well, so maybe we should not repeat that history. But there's basically very strict rules. They have very basic healthcare, very basic education rights. There's no citizenship in that country that they're in. They usually have to get permission to leave the country, so if they have or leave the camp. So if they have a appointment at the U.S. Embassy in the capital, they have to get basically exit permission from the staff at the camp. There's no way to work there, so they're not able to save money. So I think sometimes they do hair braiding, they barter for it, but there's not really, it's not a life. But many of our individuals have been in camps 10, 15, 20 years. So the other option is life as what's called an urban refugee. So you're in a country, but you're not in a camp. Most often we see this with regard to Burmese folk in Malaysia. Malaysia is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention, so they do not recognize the rights of refugees. So Burmese folk in Malaysia are undocumented. They are, quote unquote, I don't like this word, you'll hear me say, I don't like the word illegal because people aren't illegal, you yourself cannot be an illegal human being. But that's essentially what they are. They face the same vulnerabilities that undocumented folks here face, right? Wage theft, labor exploitation, really they're very vulnerable to exploitation and detention. So that is a problem for some of our refugees that live in these, quote, without refugee camps. Most commonly, I'm seeing this in Malaysia. So possible solutions for this refugee problem, right? Repatriation, we just return them all to their country. Can't do that because we're signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. And refugees and all folks, you have a right against what's called, I can't speak French, so I'm going to apologize now. I'm going to say it the Englishized way. It's non-refoulement. You have a right against returning to a country where you fear persecution. So a country cannot force you to return to your country if you fear persecution, and they're a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. This includes, hey, you have to go get a passport from Honduras because I'm going to deport you there. If you are afraid to get a passport or afraid of the government of Honduras, they cannot force you to get a passport from Honduras. Doesn't mean they're not going to try, but they cannot force you. You do have a right against availing yourself of a country where you fear persecution. Hopefully the goal is citizenship. I'm teaching that one tomorrow, so if you want to come learn about citizenship, that one's at 1 o'clock tomorrow, I think, in here. But like I said, less than 1% of refugees will get resettled. There's currently 34 countries of resettlement. The United States is by far not the largest. The largest number of refugees go to Turkey, Lebanon, things like that in the Middle East. So Australia is one that's pretty common too. Those are in Canada. Okay, so let's talk about how a person becomes a refugee, how they get resettled, that kind of thing. So the focus of resettlement will always be on the most vulnerable, such as survivors of torture, women and children, places where they really can't survive. They're by far the most vetted group to be allowed in the United States. So they're first vetted by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, who determines that they are a refugee under international law. Then they're vetted both by the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security before they're allowed to enter. They also have a comprehensive medical exam, all vaccinations before they enter the United States. Okay, this graphic is a little hard to read probably, but we're going to talk about Pathway A, the refugee resettlement process. I'm sure there's a session on asylum. Maybe my friend Hannah is teaching that session, but refugees are designated by the UNHCR. Like I said, they're vetted by the U.S. Department of State and the DHS. They're still subject to inspection at a port of entry. So refugees come in, they fly to, most commonly here in the Midwest, they fly to Chicago. Chicago inspects them and confirms that they're a refugee. It is theoretically possible for Border Patrol to deny them entry at a border station if something adverse has come up since their flight. That hasn't happened to me recently or ever, so I don't want it to. I had to make sure we all knock on wood there. But that's it. Then I'm going to get into kind of what we do, but that is how they are entering the United States. Questions so far? I feel like I'm blasting through this a little bit. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I know I've heard it said that like refugees and DOC are the most vetted people in the system. Can you just kind of summarize what's the vetting process? Because a lot of it takes place while they're overseas.
Correct. Most of it takes place.
What does that look like?
So they get like an FBI background check. They get Interpol checks. They interview family and friends and find out if they've ever been associated with any criminal organizations or anything like that. Any group that is potentially considered tangentially related to a terrorist organization, they're going to vet all that. They run their fingerprints, and they have started running eye scans, so they can check all the international databases and the local databases. Their claims are also thoroughly investigated, so it's not just like somebody walks up and is like, I'm from this minority Chin group in Burma, you need to give me asylum. Each claim is individually investigated, much like it is in the States with, an asylum interview or something like that.
So why does it take so long?
Well, in part, it's the backlog, right? So when the presidential determination drops, then that creates a longer backlog. But they have to get into the camp. They can only register so many folks in the camp at once. So you have to wait for them they have to get registered with the camp. Then they have to get registered with the UNHCR. Then they get registered. Then the UNHCR does their thing. They go to a meeting every year and they say, okay, US, you're taking 125,000 people. Here are the people we want to send to you. Then the US goes, okay, fine, but I have to check all these people. So then it takes years and years to complete all the checks. You can imagine these people are coming from countries that don't have great infrastructure systems. It's not like here where we can go to the police station, trust the police, get our fingerprints taken, get a background check in 2 to 4 weeks. It takes many years to investigate the claims.
So I'm just kind of curious how it works. Does our government have officials on site?
Yes.
With, refugee
United.
camps?
Yeah.
And so they're trying to process all these applications and people. But kind of situated alongside, yes, there are U.S. officials abroad doing this who work for the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security. Sometimes it's embassy officials, so sometimes they're sitting in the embassy there's a really Nyarugusu refugee camp in Tanzania, so our U.S. officials sit at the embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So they would do some of the final vetting. But there are also, so there are 7 or 8 what I call mothership refugee resettlement agencies. So like U.S. Conference on Catholic Bishops is one. We're affiliated with Church World Service at Exodus. So those agencies also have people on the ground that vet claims too as a contractor for the State Department. Yeah. Make sense? So basically it's just overcrowded, under-resourced from the processing side.
Yes. Right. Exactly. It's backlogs everywhere, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the presidential determination. By law, it has to be, it's set by the president, so for good or for bad, a lot of immigration policy. Oh, yeah. Serena, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. Is there a place that we could go to see where the approximately in this country?
Google. I don't know. That's usually what I do. I'm like, where were you? And they're like, you start to hear the names.
Yeah.
They're like, well, I was in, in Burundi. And I just Google refugee camps in Burundi. And then that's how, but I don't think there's a comprehensive list that I've ever found. So, yeah, sure. So he has to consult with Congress on it. And a justification for the number is, that's the total number that the U.S. is willing to resettle. Not every state takes refugees, and this is a goal number. This year, the number is 125. I think as a country, we're going to get somewhere near 60. So it's not even very close to the total number. In part, that's due to vetting, things that slow down, take time. In part this year, in particular, it's been a housing issue. There's no affordable housing anywhere. So it's been hard to agree to take refugees when you can't find a place for them to live, because that's one of our responsibilities. Yeah?
Does that number include the follow to the I-730?
Yes, that's a good question. So it does include derivative refugees and derivative asylees, which we're going to talk about follow to joins in a little bit. Good question. Also includes SIVs. So from Afghanistan and Iraq. More questions about this? Okay, like I said, we don't have a presidential determination for FY24 yet, so he's got 4 days, but he also will sign it late. I don't know. So, no, I know. We literally were talking about, we're like, wait, he really hasn't signed this yet? So, okay, so let's talk about the services that we provide and just that in general, resettlement agencies provide to refugees. So if you're encountering refugees, they should have come with a resettlement organization like Exodus. In Indiana, we have 3 major refugee resettlement orgs. There's Exodus in Indianapolis and our satellite office in Bloomington. We have Catholic Charities Indianapolis, and we have Catholic Charities Fort Wayne. So before they come, we find housing for them. We set up an apartment with donated couches and sometimes purchased items and things like that. We schedule appointments with like the food stamps office and the health department for initial screenings. And we try to get them all matched with a volunteer if we can find somebody who can kind of walk alongside them. Within 24 hours, they're greeted at the airport. This is my favorite part of my job, when I get to go and meet refugees as they're coming off the plane, and they are all wild-eyed and excited, but also a little nervous. So that's one of my favorite. That's why we always wear our shirts, and I wanted to wear my shirt today to show you that this is kind of how we stand out, so people can know that they're welcome here in Indiana. We give them appropriate clothing. I dropped a client off last week with some family members. I walked in there. It was 85 last week, 90 here in Indy. It was 85 in their apartment, and they all had jackets on. I was like, you guys it's gonna be a struggle in the winter when it gets cold, and you think it's cold now. So we give them hats, gloves, things like that. They all get it regardless of when they arrive. So even if they arrive in the middle of August, we're still gonna give them a jacket because they're gonna need it eventually in Indiana. They are welcomed with what we call a culturally appropriate hot meal. So either somebody in their family or a community member provides a meal that is something that is comforting and reminds them of home. So that could be, jollof rice, it could be fufu, it could be tea leaf salad if you're from Burma. So we do a visit 24 hours after they arrive in the US. So you can imagine you've been flying for 18 hours, you welcome in this new country, and all of a sudden people are like, okay, let me show you how to use the lights, let me show you how to use the dishwasher, I'm gonna show you how to do the laundry machine, here's how you get your mail. I would be so overwhelmed. We know they're overwhelmed. We still have a duty to explain that stuff to them as they arrive. We come back the next day and say, remember all that stuff we talked about? You wanna go over it again? They go, yes. So we do that, and we kind of check in with them, make sure that they're feeling okay. At the airport, we do check to see if anybody has any immediate medical needs. Do they need to go to urgent care? Do they need to go to the ER? Sometimes we get individuals that travel with what we call medical escorts, so particularly frail individuals. Often those people do immediately go to the hospital, be checked out after a long flight. We provide 2 weeks of food initially when they enter, because they're not going to have food stamps yet available to them.
And then we give them a cell phone. We talk about when and how to call 911. My office staff say 24/7 ER phone. We all take a turn on it. So it can be everything from, I had somebody call and say, my fan isn't working, and I said, that is not an emergency for a 3 o'clock in the morning call, but thank you very much. You can talk to your case manager tomorrow, to I'm in labor. So that was an emergency. I needed to call 911 for them. So, and then they go get their health screening, they get intake with us, they get signed up for English classes, and we start looking for jobs, and we start talking about education and things that they want to do. We help the kids enroll in school, things like that. We pay their rent and utilities for the first, this says 90 days, typically it's about 4 months. And then we have them do what we call employment readiness training. So we talk about things culturally in the United States, so eye contact, handshakes, things like this that may not be appropriate in your own culture. We try to do that. We talk about budgeting in our financial literacy training. So we talk about and we do a budget with each individual person. Here's your goal wage for how to maintain, you need to make at least $15 an hour. I have a cool story for you. This week we had a guy who did this. He did his budget. He was not making enough at his job. So he took his budget, and where it said, my goal wage is, I don't know, let's call it $15 an hour or something. He went to his boss and he said, I really like working here, but I need $15 an hour to pay my bills. And the boss gave him a raise. So good self-advocacy, and that was great. And we teach them how to use the bus. We go do what's called cultural orientation with them. So if the police stop you, you need to stop, don't take off. That creates more problems for Rachel when she has to call the police and be like, listen, this guy didn't know that, he can trust the police here. I mean, we laugh about it, but it also is a reflection of the trauma and culture that they've come from. What else do? We offer family reunification assistance primarily, and then in terms of legal services, the things I do most commonly, again, family reunification, which we're going to talk about. We do green cards. Technically, you can file for a green card almost immediately because they withdrew the requirement that you had to have 1 year physical presence before applying for a green card. You have to have 1 year physical presence at adjudication of the green card, so when they make the determination, they had to have been here a year. So I'm going to tell you that I don't file them immediately because just watch USCIS turn around and approve one in 3 months, and then they're not eligible and we have to start all over, and they got their medical exam. We file them no more than 90 days before their 1 year. So we're waiting till they've been here 9 months. Also, it's me. When I was here last, it's probably me and one other attorney, and we're now me and 3 other attorneys and 3 legal assistants, and we still are behind. So there's no way we could do them at day 31 if we wanted to anyway. The other thing I most commonly do is I do a lot of guardianships, which as DOJ reps you can't do, but as attorneys we can do for when children travel with an older sibling or maybe a grandparent. And then that's minor guardianships. We also do a fair number of adult guardianships where we had a 93-year-old refugee arrive with his son. We filed a guardianship so the son could help make financial decisions and other decisions for dad. So we do that as well. A little bit of advocacy everywhere. And we also offer mental wellness services at our office. So we have, I think, a team of 5 or 6 counselors, so we can provide that. Did you have a question?
Yeah, quick question.
Sure.
So from this list, it's a 2-part question. One is, these services that you offer, is this industry standard or is this Exodus? And then the second part of that question is, what of those things are responsible by Exodus, the organization, the caseworkers, and then volunteers? How do you...
Okay, great question. So this is Exodus specific, though I would say 30 and everything up to 30 and 90 days is kind of industry standard. Mental wellness is not industry standard. That's a place where we stand out to provide that service. We do have a duty to connect clients with mental wellness, but to provide it in-house is definitely a unique feature of Exodus and something that we really value as an organization. So we have, like I said, a team of 75. So we have a pre-arrival coordinator that does all the things in pre-arrival, a staff member. We have staff that are assigned to go welcome people at the airport. So that could be anybody from any of the staff, like I go and welcome people at the airport. We also sometimes have volunteers. Now, if they've been pre-matched with a volunteer, then maybe the volunteer goes and welcomes them. Particularly if they have family or friends here, often the family and friends will also go with us to greet them, and it's like a big reunion, and it's fun. We have volunteers teach English classes and some of our cultural orientation classes, so volunteers definitely play a role in that. And then we have what we call like family mentors and community support teams. So these are people that kind of walk alongside and kind of fill the role of a case manager, maybe beyond 90 days, because we really only have the capacity to be a case manager for kind of an intensive case manager for 90 days. Which, let me give you a caveat to that. If there are particularly vulnerable clients, single mothers, people with significant medical issues, we have special programming available and intensive case managers in those cases. Does that kind of answer your question? Great. Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Gary from Texas.
Uh-huh.
For the 90-day industry standard
Uh-huh.
practice, what do you estimate the budget is for your organization to take one person through that 90 days?
Well, refugees get per State Department allocation, I think it's $1,200 allocated to them. You can imagine how far $1,200 does not go in 90 days. I don't know if I could give you that number off the top of my head, but it's definitely, probably in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $7,000 a person that we welcome. We do get state fund, so we get funding from the State Department. You get an allocation per refugee. And there's money that's used to pay staff, like there's what we call admin money, and then there's direct money. Direct money goes directly to the clients, right? We spend it on their behalf. We also give them cash at the airport so they can, like I had a client last week call me and ask me if I would buy him Fanta. And I was like, no, but that's what your airport money is for, your cash. Also, you're gonna be disappointed because Fanta here does not taste anything like Fanta overseas. So fair warning, the Fanta here is gross. But I don't know if that's actually a really interesting thing, and I can try to find out if the number. I'll be here till tomorrow afternoon. I can actually text my boss later and find out and see if he has an estimate, and you could try to find me, we could talk about it, because I haven't actually contemplated that before.
What kind of funding comes through, like per refugee resettlement agency?
Let me come back to that. Let me just let him finish his, is that okay? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Because the second part of my question is we seek to hire refugees all the time and offered our jobs to pull them out of the 50-mile radius when they're in the settlement zone.
Right.
And I'm wondering, how do we, us, solve that problem when we have good paying jobs for them, they get disconnected from their, and they're
Yeah.
voluntarily coming, right? I'm trying to think about how to solve that. What thoughts do you have? Could you explain to everybody the 50-mile radius?
Yeah, so refugee, I think it might be 100 miles now, or they changed it, but we can only serve people who live within so many miles of our organization. Maybe it's 100 miles for us because we have 2 sites. That might be. I know during APA, it was within the during the Afghan crisis, it was within the geographical confines of your state. So it was anywhere. But generally, we have to be able to provide services within 50 miles. They have to be located within 50 miles so that we can provide the services. Otherwise, it's too big a burden on the agency to provide those services. I don't know how to solve that problem. I think generally, like when they're going out of 50 miles, hopefully they're going to a lower cost of living area. Typically, you think you see them 3 months after arrival? Are you seeing them that quickly when they come to be employed at your plants?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
The Afghans in particular.
Well, yes. Hardworking folk, yeah.
You're in multiple situations when they were
Yeah, and the Afghan situation is like such an anomaly situation. Like that's not how, they weren't refugees, right? Afghans were welcomed in as what we call parolees. So they weren't even refugees. They were subject to a lot of this, but it wasn't the same. And there was a lot of like, you don't have to do this because all of a sudden we had to welcome 70,000 people into the United States in a period of 3 months. So Afghans are an interesting population. They've been treated very much like refugees. You know, colloquially, they're refugees, legally they're not. So it's a little bit different with them, but that's interesting. I would love to talk to you about that more if I can kind of wrap my head around it, but yeah. Okay, so your question was what kind of funding do the refugees get or does the agency?
The agency.
Okay.
And then how much of that would be roughly percentage-wise invested directly to the refugee?
So it depends on the program. So we do get a lot of private dollars, and every time we do that, like legal services is pretty much funded exclusively by private funds. So Lilly, Lilly Drugs funds us to do some of the work, other things like that. Most of our programming that's not legal is is federally funded. So also if the government shuts down, we're about to not get paid. It's okay, I mean, we're all gonna keep our jobs, but we're not gonna get paid, which is great. So we have to set a specific budget for what we call direct allocation, and we have something called like basically emergency fund. So where somebody's like, hey, I just got in a car accident, my car cost me $800 to fix my car, I can't pay my rent. We consider those on a case-by-case basis. So it's hard for me to give you an exact percentage because it kind of depends on the case and the person. But I would guess roughly a quarter of our funding probably goes directly to the client. And the rest is used for admin purposes, programming, developing relationships, things like that.
And
Yeah.
what kind of funding per refugee would your organization receive?
Well, so we get the State Department dollars. Yeah, it's about $1,200. Well, it's about $2,200. $1,000 goes to the admin portion, so it pays the case manager for the first 90 days, and the second $1,200 goes directly to the refugee or on their behalf. So we say, like, it's not like I hand them a check for $1,200. Like, I go buy groceries and that costs $200, so that comes out of their budget, things like that. Does that make sense? I don't.
That's all the funding? Like $2,000 a month or $2,000 for the 90 days?
$2,000 for the 90 days. Yeah, but then we have to supplement it with additional funding from private sources and things like that. So, yeah.
And back to Garrett's question, is it solved by having a refugee resettlement agency in those communities?
I don't think so. They're refugee resettlement agencies have to go. You have to like apply, and you have to be. It's very difficult.
You could have, like, I know in like one of the plants I'm familiar with in Garden City, they had international ref
Oh yeah, IRC.
IRC had an office there, so we were able to.
Yeah, I mean maybe that's part of the solution. I just don't think it's the only solution to getting people jobs and putting them to work. So yeah, go ahead.
Is there any point that the refugees start paying for these services?
They don't pay for our services, but they are expected at month 5 to start paying their own bills, phone bill, things like that. But no, they are not. And currently, my legal services does not charge for services, which I know is not the model of Immigrant Connection. But actually, we're exploring, because legal services funding can be so tenuous and depends on who's in office, that we're actually exploring a modest means or a fee-for-service model as well at my organization. So, yeah.
And you said you're filing for the I-485 90 days prior to their 1-year
Anniversary date. Yeah. That's just my recommendation based on how they don't adjudicate these quickly, but like watch them do that. Like you file it month 3 and they are like, oh, okay, 30 days later, here's your green card. Oh, but you don't get it because you haven't been here a year yet. I just don't want to be in that position. Plus, if all the refugees we had arrive, say this year, FY23, that's almost 700 refugees, plus we have all these Afghan people who are getting asylum, So Afghan asylees who are going to need green cards. That means my team of 7 has to do 1,100 green cards next year. So I do not have the time to do them immediately when they enter. I'm basically working a year behind.
And does your site see, I'm not sure how it works in Indiana, do you see any of those that they're requiring interviews for, or are they all pretty much?
Sometimes, and usually it's not a very good sign. If we get called for an interview, it's usually like a red flag. What did we miss? But no, most of the ones that we do at my office are waived. Yeah. So, sure.
Thank you very much. So I have a question regarding the reparole.
Oh, okay.
So
For Afghans?
For Afghan
Okay.
population here. So, for example, their EADs are expiring or already expired, and they did not receive the receipt of extension, or they did not receive their new EAD. So they are home now because
They're home now?
job-
Yeah, okay.
Their EAD is already expired for
Uh-huh.
some of them. So do you have some services for those kind of people who have children and kids themselves, and rent is there, and they don't have any income? So do you have any solution, or do you think about this?
Yeah, so that's a good question. For those of you not familiar with the Afghan process, so I'm just going to give a little context and I'll answer this question. So Afghans arrived initially on humanitarian parole or Operation Ally's refugee parole, and it is good for 2 years at a time. And most of them just expired between August and the end of the year. They will have expired the first round of parole. People who had pending green cards, pending asylum cases, were automatically re-paroled, but sometimes they didn't get the notice that they were re-paroled, they didn't get a new card, things like that. So, and at my office in particular, we probably, by the time we had some people leave, our agent, leave and go to Iowa and whatever, we probably ended up with about 325 Afghans, and we actually individually made sure that each person was able to maintain employment. Afghans don't need the EAD card to work. They need the new I-94, which hopefully has been updated, and they need a form of ID. And we've had great success by calling Department of Justice. Like, Amazon just keeps messing up. Like, I don't think they're doing it intentionally. There's so many HR folk at Amazon that they don't know what the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So we call the DOJ hotline, and they call Amazon's counsel, and then Amazon counsel calls the plant and says, you can't do that, and then they go, okay. We've had back pay reinstated for clients who were unlawfully terminated from their job. So I don't know that directly answers your question, but I'd be happy to talk to you more about re-parole if you want, like later this evening or whatever, too. But I mean, or I can answer more questions now.
Thank
Sure.
you. Yeah.
1 second.
So as you said, as also working with Mr. Jim and also other friends here, so they are disparate most of the time. And also, like some Afghans, I have another question also, some Afghans are coming, so as you say, we cannot say illegally, but they are
Across the border. Yeah.
Border. And when I was, I saw some of them, not Afghans, other nationalities also, they were told that we are not allowed, there's a resettlement agency called Alliance for Africa. So they told them that we are not allowed to serve you because you're undocumented and you're illegal here, so therefore, how you are dealing with those kinds of?
Yeah, so we have special programming, so we don't have to deal with that. That is true. State Department dollars, federal funds will not allow you to serve folks who are quote unquote undocumented, including folks in removal proceedings, unless they have some sort of other tie. It's a little complicated to get into that. We have a program at our offices called Services to Asylum Seekers, which is completely privately funded and allows us to serve some folks like that. but that's not common across the board. We actually just had a big meeting, like nationwide meeting about the Afghans at the border and how to assist there, in part because the continued evacuation of vulnerable Afghans has been so poor out of Kabul and really that whole region. Where are you located? What state are you in?
I was looking for in North Carolina. Now I'm in California.
Oh, okay. I know there are some private attorneys in the Sacramento area, things like that are willing to help, but I don't know. It really depends on each agency's funding and whether they're able to assist folks that are in removal, because really we have to think about Afghans that come in that way as the same as, like, it's the same way we talk about Salvadorans and Hondurans and Guatemalans. They're all folks that are in removal proceedings, and the United States government doesn't distinguish when somebody's in removal. Well, they're from Afghanistan, so they should get priority, or things like that. So I think that's part of what's hard for the Afghans that are coming in from the border, is that they have been told by their friends, hey, my case got prioritized, I got all these benefits, and now they're not getting it, and so it's hard. But the US government doesn't distinguish between those, various nationalities. And there are all these border procedures where they have to make an appointment on an app to be able to apply for asylum and things like that. So, yeah, sure. Did you have another question? Okay. Okay. Oh, look, I had a whole slide about the direct funding and I missed it. Here we go. So $12.75, this goes to pay what we call pocket money, is what the money we give them at the airport. So it's $100 per adult that they get. We buy, if we have to buy a coat, clothing, food, housing, including utilities, cleaning products, rent. We have a whole list of things that have to be in every apartment. We literally have to count spoons, and if they're going to live with somebody, we have to be like, can you show us your toilet paper stash? Because we have to have that there's 6 rolls of toilet paper for every one person that's going to live here. So if they're going to move in with their brother, we literally have to count their rolls of toilet paper, which feels a little weird, I'm not going to lie. We buy school supplies. If they need Tylenol or something like that, we go and we can buy stuff at CVS for them. So that was my little what we spend money on. Okay, so I want to move on to family reunification of refugees, because does this go till 2:45? Okay. I have a feeling this might take us a minute, so I'm going to move on. But like I said, I will be around all evening. If you have more questions about refugee resettlement, the refugee resettlement process, either stop me after or find me at dinner or whatever this evening. I'll hang out as long as anybody has a question, okay? Okay, so I don't know what happened to my fancy slide background, but it disappeared midway through this, so it's fine. So we're going to talk about I-730s, which are family members of a refugee or an asylee. I'm going to talk a little bit about I-130s, that's family members of an immigrant. Related to refugee resettlement, I'm going to talk about what we call CAM petitions, Central American Minor petitions. I'm going to talk about fiancés and refugees because this comes up a lot. I'm going to talk about AOR petitions, which stands for Affidavit of Relationships, and those are petitions exclusively filed by resettlement agencies, so you won't file them unless you're at a resettlement agency. But I want you to know about that they exist in case you encounter a client that might benefit from one. And then we're just going to kind of talk about miscellaneous other petitions, including the Afghan DS 4317 Care Reunification Program. So that'll all be back. You don't have to write those numbers down yet. Okay, so I like to start with this, and I know you can't really see this, but this was created in 2008. This talks about the lines for immigration and how long they are. These numbers aren't probably very accurate anymore, but the process is. I think this is helpful, especially if you're just starting out and you're like, wait, a permanent resident can bring who? I like this graphic. I'm happy to share this with Immigrant Connection, the whole PowerPoint, and you guys can download this. You can also Google this, what part of legal immigration don't you understand, and it'll come up. But when I was first starting and I couldn't remember who can bring who can bring what, this was really helpful for me. So a US citizen can bring their parent, their child, their spouse, and those people don't count against a visa cap. They can also bring their brothers and sisters, their adult married children. Like a US citizen is the golden ticket, right? If you're here. If they are a lawful permanent resident or they have a green card, they can only bring their spouse or children who are unmarried. So it kind of varies. So I find this graphic helpful to kind of remind myself. I give it to all of my new staff. I give it to non-immigration staff, non-legal services staff, just so that we're all on the same page, because I used to say 90% of this job, now I think it's like 97% of this job is managing client expectations, right? Because they hear overseas, hey, just go, you can call your family member later. Then they come and they're like, okay, I want to bring my family member. And I'm like, great, it's probably going to be 15 years. And they're like, what? They told me it would be just a few months. And it's never just a few months. We found out last week, we have a gentleman who's 81, who's been separated from Eritrea, who's been separated from his wife for 15 years, and she's just now going to arrive. I'm glad that they finally get to reunify. Will I be going to the airport for that one? Yes, I will. But that's how long these things take. So it's not a quick process. So even if you're just doing an intake with somebody, we really need to always be telling people that this is a very long process, because it does nobody any good if they think it's going to take 3 months and it takes 10 years, right? Then they're going to just be perpetually disappointed. And I had somebody that was like, well, I'm just going to wait for my husband to get here and then I'll get a job. And I'm like, no, you have to do this now, because, and if you're a single parent, that's hard, but that's where we are at with reunification processing. Okay, so let's talk about I-730 specifically. These are asylee or refugee relative petitions. So this means somebody who entered the United States as a refugee. You'll see that referenced on an I-94 as RE. On a digital I-94, they may also have what we colloquially call it a refugee travel document. It's not actually a travel document. It's like a piece of paper that has their photos on it, and it's a boarding foil, if you've ever heard it called a boarding foil. So it allows a person to enter the United States without a passport. It'll have a stamp on it. If they entered as a refugee, the stamp will say, entered as a refugee pursuant to 207 of the INA. If they entered as the derivative of somebody's asylum case, so it'll say 208. So that's how you can tell the difference between whether they came in as it doesn't make a difference except for when you go to apply for adjustment. If they entered under 208, you have to do a fee waiver for adjustment. If they entered under 207, then it's a refugee adjustment, it's statutorily waived. So that's the only reason we need to know about how they entered initially. So refugees and asylees can bring certain family members to the United States within either 2 years of their arrival or 2 years of the grant of asylum. So if they were granted asylum yesterday, 9/25, they would have until 9/24/2025. I can't do math today, it's hard. And if they entered the United States last week, it would be until 2025. There are ways to make exceptions for this. This is my coolest exception story. Gentleman from the Congo who was fleeing with he had 2 kids, his wife was fleeing behind him, had the baby on her back. They're fleeing in the middle of war, right? They hear pop, 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 pop. He's just trying to grab these 2 kids. The wife falls. He looks behind him and he sees the wife is dead. So he does what any dad would do and keeps running with the 2 little kids. So he makes it 6 years later to the United States. He gets a call from somebody. He goes, I think your daughter's here. And he was like, that's not possible. She was killed, like on the mom's back. Turns out she wasn't. Turns out that she was somehow survived. They picked her up, took her to an orphanage, and they could tell that it was his daughter because she had 6 fingers. And they did DNA testing too, but luckily the daughter survived. So we didn't know about the daughter was still alive until 3.5 years after he had been to the US. I filed the 730 anyway, saying the daughter's existence was unknown. It was granted. That family is now back together. And that girl looks exactly like her dad, so that was my good story about that. But mostly they have to do this. They also have to arrive as the principal refugee. So if it's mom is the principal, and then dad wants to bring his child from a previous relationship, has to be filed as a stepchild relationship because it has to be filed by mom. More commonly, where we see this come to be a problem is they're one family unit, mom, dad, 3 kids. oldest kid is now married with his own children. He wants to bring them. Unfortunately, he cannot do the 730 process because it came as a derivative on mom's case. So he would have to do the I-130 process would be the option for him. So that children have to be under the age of 21 at the time of entry or the time of application for asylum. So and the relationship has to have existed at the time of entry as a refugee. So if they come in and then, one second, let me finish my thought and I'll come back to you. If they come in and they're not married, but they somehow get married, a year later, unfortunately, they're not going to be eligible to file the 730 because the relationship doesn't exist at the time they entered the United States.
So I have, there was a potential client that had a spouse that was not married to them when they entered, but they were married before they filed for asylum.
Yeah, that should be okay. Because it has to be at the time of because of the way asylum works.
And then also, if the beneficiary is in the United States, but not on the official asylum case as a beneficiary with the I-730, are they going to have to file for a 601A of unlawful presence?
Well, it depends. That's a whole lot of other questions. So it depends on how they entered, how long they've been here, all kinds of things like that. But typically not with the 730. But I'd be happy to talk to you about that one specifically if you'd like. Okay. Processing times for 730s based on asylee, approximately 13 months. There are no available processing times for refugees. Anecdotally, I would tell you 2 years, 24 months for 730s based on a refugee. And that's just from the time we file it till it gets approved. That is not, then it gets sent overseas, and then we're waiting another 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
That was my question. Do you have an estimate for the?
Depends on the country. It depends on, mostly depends on where they are and how long it's going to take them. Like, if they're from Latin America, because there aren't that many refugees coming right now from Latin America, it's a little faster. If they're from Africa, like RSC Africa is so backed up, like good luck. So, that's probably the longest is Africa, any of the African countries. And there was also an issue during Trump's administration. He made a rule that they had to process all the refugee visas out of Nairobi, which was really hard for a lot of Africans to get, because especially Eritreans, they have to get exit visas from Ethiopia. Then they also have to apply for a visa to enter Kenya. And so it made it incredibly difficult for them. Somebody else have a question? No. Okay.
No way to find that estimated time.
They're supposed to start making it available, but have they done that yet? No.
But you said your office is seeing like 20 to 24 months?
Yeah, I would guess on a filing of a 730 to an approval of a 730. We see a fair number of requests for evidence too, though, proving bona fides of a relationship, mostly. Yeah.
How fast can the beneficiary get work authorization?
They come in as a refugee or an asylee, so immediately. Oh, and did you all hear the good news about refugee EADs? They're going to be good for 5 years now. So refugees, so as of last week, every refugee that enters after 10-1, every applicant for asylum, every applicant for a adjustment of status, refugees, people who have cancellation of removal or withholding, all are going to get 5-year EADs. So when you apply for that initial C8 EAD for a person who's applied for asylum, for example, that EAD is going to be good for 5 years, which is going to be amazing. So that means they don't have to apply for renewal every 2 years. Or in the case of withholding, it's a 1-year EAD right now, but it's going to be 5 years starting next week. So you're all here now, so that's good. But if you have any EADs you're about to send out for any of that, I would wait until 10-1 so that they get approved after 10-1.
What's the point of the EAD for the refugee?
Oh, that's a good question. Refugees are authorized to work incidental to status, right? So they come in, they're authorized to work. Do employers understand that? Absolutely not. Did the BMV understand that? No way. So they get an EAD to prove their eligibility, even though they have an unrestricted Social Security card. So it's really about making the other systems work for us. Yes. Yeah, but that's a great question. Sure.
So as soon as you get the approved 730,
No. If they're in the United States, if the 730 beneficiary is inside the United States, they're going to have to go for an interview, and then they're going to have to be approved for refugee status. It's a little different. If most 730 beneficiaries are abroad, then it gets sent to the NVC. Then the NVC sends it to the embassy. It takes forever. And then once they enter, they'll enter with the assistance of a resettlement organization. Refugee derivatives enter with the assistance of a resettlement org. So we go welcome them at the airport, and they get treated like primary refugees. Sure.
Is there any advantage for our involvement in that waiting process with folks that are overseas, like firing an email to the embassy or anything like that?
I feel like the embassy ignores all of my emails. Like, they probably get 9,000 a day. I will say, I think the only way, if you have a dire situation, like we have a little kid that was stuck in Kabul, like by himself with the grandparents. It's a complicated situation. We got a congressman involved, a senator. I think those are the only kinds of inquiries where you're going to be able to make any movement on those cases. But even then, they're probably going to be like, they're waiting their turn. But if it's a real urgent situation, you could also potentially apply for humanitarian parole to bring them over early, but I've rarely seen that work too. So I would say generally no, unless you've got really good cause to say, hey, this person, the person here has leukemia, and this person might be a bone marrow transplant. Maybe try a congressional intervention that way.
Their age does get frozen, right, at the point where
Good question, yeah. So at the time it's filed, their age is frozen. They're subject to Child Status Protection Act. Okay. Here's the things you need to prove. To have evidence of the petitioner's status, here we call it I-94, or I'm going to call it a boarding foil, for lack of a better term. Their asylum approval notice or their court document that says they were granted asylum. That's what you need to prove that they're eligible for the 730. Evidence of the relationship, birth certificates for children, if they have them. Remember, refugees are fleeing for their lives, and they don't often think to grab a family registry or birth certificate. So we get creative, and we think of other ways to prove. Affidavits, school records, baptismal records, things like that. More often than not, I send Western Union receipts to show commingling of finances. I also show WhatsApp messages, Facebook Messenger. I take screenshots and say, look, these people are in constant communication. So, yeah.
Well, how do you get that UNHCR registry?
Well, they might have it. Sometimes they have it if they registered their whole family and maybe one kid came off because they got married or something. 730 beneficiaries should not be married when they come in. If they did, they slipped through the cracks somehow, and you're going to usually have to deal with that somehow. Marriage certificates, if there's a spouse, has to have been lawful in the country where it was, where they were married. So if same-sex marriage is allowed in the country, it's allowable here. It's fine. This happens. There's an exception to this, particularly for Burmese folks out of Malaysia. So because Malaysia is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention, they make Burmese folks get the permission of Burma to get married, to have a civilly registered marriage in Malaysia. So we talked about that violates their right against non-refoulement, so being forced to avail themselves of a country where they fear persecution. So we've had great success showing just church weddings without a civil registry certificate and saying you literally cannot force them to get this because you're violating their rights to get that. Also, sometimes I've won a case at the BIA, the Board of Immigration Appeals, regarding a Somali woman who was asked to provide a marriage certificate to her spouse. And if you're not familiar, the visa reciprocity table lists all the civil documents that are available in a particular country. Somalia doesn't have a functioning government, didn't then. There were no documents available. They denied my case anyway. I sent it to the BIA. I said, listen, your own paperwork says if she did produce a marriage certificate, you would say it was fraudulent because there's no government. And I did win that appeal. So sometimes you have to fight them on it, but they shouldn't have to provide them if there's no documents available. So affidavits are one of the best things. And literally the affidavits usually say, my name is so-and-so. I know the beneficiary and the petitioner because I was at their wedding. I have known them for X number of years. I saw them act as married husband and wife, and they sign them, and that sometimes works. So, again, if they have any photos together, that's great. Any other proof of relationship, including money sent abroad. Commingling of finances is a good way to always prove bona fides, because you're not going to share money with somebody you're probably not in a relationship with. Other great proof of relationship, children in common. So birth certificates of children, even if they were born here, and the spouse is listed on the birth certificate. There is no cost to file an I-730, no cost to immigration. And they enter, so they're, as refugees or asylees, so they are entitled to benefits and they are ORR eligible, meaning that, let me finish my thought and I'll come right to you, meaning that they are eligible for food stamps and Medicaid initially upon entry, and resettlement benefits, meaning we come welcome them at the airport and get them set up.
When you do the screenshots, how many do you include messaging?
Oh, I try to show a few over a different time period. So I don't know. I usually in the neighborhood of 10, but I try to show different months or something like that. I don't want to send 3,000 text messages. Yeah.
How much time do you normally allocate to complete one I-730?
I can do these in my sleep, so I'm probably not the best person to ask, but let me tell you how much time I allocate for my staff who are new at this. Probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours per one. I could probably do them 30, 35 minutes, but I literally have been doing this, and this is the first thing I learned how to do when I started to become an immigration attorney. So, and you get better the more you get familiar with the country conditions and what documents they might have. So if they're Afghan, I file the 730. I'm like, okay, give me your Tazkara, which is their Afghan national ID. I want to see this document. You get better with the names of the documents the more you do it and the different populations you work with. I want your cedula, I want your matricula, whatever documents that you're requiring. It gets a little bit easier as you work with more people. Sure.
Just a processing question. So if someone comes in on 730, do they get assigned to a resettlement?
Yeah, so if they come in as a refugee, 730, so derivative of refugee, yes, they're allocated to an agency, and then we get the call that they're coming. And then it's our duty to inform the client that they're coming. I mean, not that you can't be involved, but we'll get a phone number for the client, the primary person who's here, the petitioner, and we'll say, hey, your family member's coming on this day. This is what we're going to do. Are they going to live with you? Do you need a new apartment? We go through everything with them.
So if we're working with, if we're filing a 730 for someone, but we're not a resettlement agency,
they're going to get assigned to the local one.
They would get assigned to a local one, and then that would kind of be handed off then.
Yeah, so then we would say that you filed one in my area, I was your resettlement agency. We would then be in charge of providing those services that we initially talked about. We would be their case manager, get them set up. To the extent you wanted to continue to be involved, I'm sure that most resettlement agencies would welcome you. When I didn't work for this resettlement agency, I would get calls from this resettlement agency saying, hey, this person you filed a 734 is coming, do you want to come meet them at the airport? So to the extent you want to be involved, I'm 99% sure most resettlement agencies would love your involvement. But once you've filed it, really it's out of your hands, right? Once it gets approved, there's limited, what I'm going to call consular processing for refugees you can do, but it's not like I-130 consular processing where you're filling out the DS-260 and things like that. It's really just making sure the beneficiary is aware of their interview, makes it to the interview, that kind of things, has all the documents they need. But it's not strict consular processing like we talk about. So when I contemplate a fee for this kind of service, I think of it as just one service, the I-730. Whereas if I contemplate a fee for an I-130, think about the I-130 and then a second fee for the consular processing. But there really is no a formal consular processing for this. It's maybe a couple of emails. So you'd want to calculate that into your fees, but I think it's limited. Did that answer your question? Okay, go ahead.
Can also a person who has pending asylum or on parole here, can he or she apply humanitarian role because he doesn't have have or she doesn't have any adjusting status
Mhm.
here, people without status, like pending asylum
Mhm.
or parole, people who are already existed here, can they apply for humanitarian parole for their family?
Yes.
This is one thing, and also second thing, what about I-1743?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that at the end for Afghans.
Oh yeah.
The DS 4317. Yeah, we'll talk about that. But yes, they could apply for humanitarian parole. I don't know if it would be approved. There were 40,000 applications for humanitarian parole filed at the beginning of the Afghan crisis, and less than 1,000 were approved. So I don't see it being a very successful option. And again, I'm going to up it now. 98% of this job is managing client expectations. So when we did that, it was, this is not likely going to happen, but I will do it for you because it's a chance. But it is, I don't want you to put your hopes on the fact that your family's going to arrive via humanitarian parole like this, because it, especially in Afghanistan, because of the fact that there were no commercial flights, the U.S. had no ground operations in Kabul post August 31st. There was no way to vet these cases like we talked about, because 730s also get vetted, so it was very difficult. So I have a 730 pending for an Afghan who won her asylum claim, and we are, the embassy in Islamabad is not currently accepting new cases, so we're having to find a different place for him to go. So we're looking at Qatar, Uzbekistan, things like that. So you can move a 730 case if your beneficiary moves. Just FYI, you can email the embassy where it's currently stationed and say, I'd like you to transfer it to. I tried to get it to Karachi. Karachi doesn't do 730 interviews, so, you know, we do what we can. Okay, more questions about this? I'm going to run through I-130s. I don't personally do I-130s at the moment because you have to have sufficient income to be able to file an I-130, and I don't have the capacity to assist people who are what I would call over poverty at the moment. We're really at saturation with people that are in below 125, 150% of federal poverty. So how long a case takes for an I-130 depends on which category the family member falls into. So they're an F1, they're an unmarried son or daughter of a US citizen. Note that there is no category for US citizen spouses, minor children, or parents, because they are not subject to a numerical limitation on a visa. The rest of these folks are. So let's look at how long this takes. So this is, I did this in May, so this is 5 months old. But I don't know if you can see, F4 are brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters of folks from Mexico. They're working on cases that were filed in August of 2000. I have staff members that are younger than that, which also makes me feel incredibly old, but it's fine. So they're working on cases from the Philippines that were filed in August of 2002. So this is an incredibly long process. We talk about refugee resettlement being long. I-130s are incredibly long, particularly if you're talking about brothers and sisters or married children of permanent residents. F3 and F4 are long. I don't know if you can see that. This is 97 for married children of LPRs. In 1997, that case had to have been filed. I definitely have staff members that are younger than 1997.
I just got a question for you on that.
Sure.
Related to this on the humanitarian side, they need that thing where people can be invited to wait out their time with work authorization in the States if they're from Colombia and
Yep, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela.
what's the point? I mean, how are they selecting those places for the people to wait?
It's because of the populations of people that are trying to come across the border. So it relates to them trying to stem the tide of folks that are coming across the southern border. By the way, there were 10,000 border apprehensions yesterday. 10,000 in one day is a lot. We're all pro-immigrant in this room, but that is not a sustainable number, and I'm not sure what the answer is, but that is, I was floored when they said that yesterday, or this morning on the news, so. Okay, so with an I-130, you have to file this I-130. Also, you have to provide proof of financial ability to care for the beneficiary. A person who files an I-130 will not receive refugee benefits. They will not be greeted by my agency at the airport. They are not eligible for food stamps or Medicaid until they become a permanent resident and have another qualifying thing. So they do come in as permanent residents. So they come in and they can work immediately. But a lot of times when I talk to people about this, and they're like, oh, but Exodus is going to help them, right? They're going to get, no, there's nothing I can do about this. So if they're outside, then they have to do consular processing, which again, I contemplate as a completely separate, it really is a separate process. You have to file separate forms for that. You have to show, again, financial ability. When you're looking at the chart for whether the person has the income in order to support this, it is their household size plus the number of people that they want to bring. So say it's a family of 4, they want to bring 2, they're going to sponsor 2 individuals. You need to look at the income basis for the family of 6. You can have a co-sponsor if the petitioner does not make enough income, and you can include marital income by filing an 864EZ, which, oh no, an 864A, I'm sorry. Whew, too many letters. So, okay, so once that you complete all this, it gets, I-130 processing times vary depending on who you're filing for. I think siblings take 5 to 6 years from application to approval within the United States, then they go on to consular processing. But they will have to attend an interview. This is somebody who might need a 601A, depending on if they've been here, or they might have to consular process. So, okay, so you have to show documents which prove the relationship, again, a copy of their naturalization certificate or a permanent resident card, or in the case of a native-born U.S. citizen, their U.S. birth certificate or passport. Or I guess their passport even if they're not native-born, as long as they have proof of U.S. Citizenship. Affidavits, sometimes to show ongoing relationships, pictures of a wedding ceremony, again, screenshots, again, if they've listed them as the beneficiary on their life insurance policy, or I don't know, they're some sort of, beneficiary on a health insurance, that can be a good way to show. And then again, children born of the marriage are my favorite way to prove a bona fide relationship. So, okay, so currently the cost is $535 per application, separate applications required for every person you bring. So say you're bringing your mom and your dad, $535 per person, so $1,070 total. Consular processing is approximately $2,000 ish. Plus you have to arrange for and pay for the flight to the United States, as opposed to refugees who get a loan from the International Organization for Migration, and their travel is arranged for them. So they do have to pay that loan after 6 months. They start paying, it's a 0% interest loan. It's like maybe $20 a month. It helps establish credit in the United States. It's all good. But with an I-130, they have to do it. And again, they're not eligible for what we call ORR benefits, or Office of Refugee Resettlement benefits. Okay. Let me talk to you about Central American minors. I'm feeling you all deal with probably a significant number of Hispanic individuals, including Central Americans. So this is a program that was created in 2014 during the last kind of big border surge of children. It was created by President Obama. It was tanked by Trump early into his presidency. But it allows parents or legal guardians from El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras who are here on one of the following types of immigration statuses, so permanent resident, TPS, a parole, deferred action, including DACA, deferred enforced departure, which is like something they give people after TPS. So if the TPS ends, but you still have a significant population of people that would, like this last time this happened was Liberians. Liberians had TPS, the need for TPS in Liberia ended. They gave deferred enforced departure to the Liberians, basically saying, okay, we know you've been here 20 years. Here's a few years to kind of get your life together before you have to think about going home. Then they did the Liberian Adjustment Act, and they didn't end up having to go home, but that's a whole other thing. Withholding of removal, if you're familiar, that's a statutory form of asylum, a lesser form of asylum that has no rights to family reunification as opposed to asylum, so that's included here. And new with the Biden iteration of this, pending asylum as of April 11th, 2023, pending U visa, so victims of violent crime, or pending T visa, victims of trafficking, was an eligible petitioner category. This can only be filed by resettlement agencies. So you need to know this, not so you can file it yourself, but so that you can be aware of it when you're counseling clients about family reunification options. The qualifying child has to be both a national of and residing in one of these Northern Triangle countries. Interesting, they don't have to be a national of and residing in their own country. So they, like, say they're, for example, a national of Honduras, but they're living in Guatemala. Okay, that's fine. But this is opposed to most other kinds of relief like this where they can't be in their country of origin, so it's a little weird. They have to be unmarried and under the age of 21. They have to be the biological step or legally adopted child of a qualifying parent. And sometimes we can include other family members. Like, I just had a gentleman who has TPS. We filed, well, not just, like a year ago. We filed for his 3-year-old daughter, and we petitioned for mom as well through the CAM process because the 3-year-old couldn't travel by herself. CAM cases come very quickly. That family is already here. We filed it 18 months ago and they're here. Let me give this a full circle for you on this CAM case. So CAM cases can come either as refugees or parolees. So they're interviewed. If they meet the definition of a refugee, they enter as a refugee, which means we resettle them. Mom and daughter enter as a refugee. Dad has TPS status. Mom entered as a principal refugee. I filed a 730 for dad. So I think I'm going to, in turn, have gotten dad refugee status by somehow doing this CAM program, which is, like, I feel like legal magic, and I really like it. So we have one recently that we're filing where the grandmother's a primary caretaker of some minor children. We're going to try to include grandma, too. It may not work, but. So again, Central American minors cases can only be filed by resettlement agencies. We file them for all over the state of Indiana. For those of you that are in Indiana, if you encounter these cases, you are welcome to refer them to us. You should find a resettlement agency in your state and try to get them, find out where they go. But when you're talking to parents about family reunification options, you do need to keep this in mind, even if it's not something you can do, right? Because we have a duty to provide our client with all the options. It's a very good question. I don't know. I think in 2014 was before a lot of the uprising in Nicaragua. So I don't know why they haven't updated it, but they haven't. But I agree. I think it should be, but it's not. Okay, so I want to talk about fiancé petitions just because this comes up a lot for refugees. I don't know if you guys, anybody here do fiancé petitions on the regular? Okay, so you guys know a little bit about it, but I don't, because again, I don't have time for this. So I have done them, but like more often than not, you have to be a US citizen to petition for a fiancé. So a refugee, they come here, I want to get married, my fiancé's back in Africa. How long have you been here? I've been a year. Sorry, you're not a US citizen, you cannot file for a fiancé. But let me tell you the things that they have to do. They have to be able to show that they've met the beneficiary in person in the last 2 years, or that there was a good reason that they could not have done that. COVID was a good reason, but they have to be able to show that. They also have to show intent to marry within 90 days. I will not lie to you that 90-day fiancé is a guilty pleasure of mine, because those people are such train wrecks. I don't know how they get here on 90-day fiancé, but whatever, it's kind of entertaining. They have to show, so typically you have to show like I tried one time just being like, oh, they're gonna go to the courthouse and get married, but we had to show that they had a date and they had communicated it to family and things like that. They're not eligible for refugee benefits or any benefits. They have to be able to prove financial ability to provide for the beneficiary. Remember that when you're filing an I-130, if you are talking to the petitioner, I-130 or the fiancé, remind them that their obligation to provide financially for that person does not stop upon divorce. It's 7 years or until the person naturalizes, whatever is less time. But it really is important to remind them that if they get divorced in 2 years, it doesn't mean that their obligation, and the obligation is not to affirmatively pay for things, but it's if they need to go to the doctor and they use Medicaid, you will get sued by Medicaid to reimburse them. And that will continue even if you divorce the individual. Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about AOR petitions. Again, AOR is only something that can be filed by resettlement agencies. A CAM petition, a Central American Minor petition, is a kind of AOR petition. So AOR stands for Affidavit of Relationship. The person here, what we call the U.S. tie or the anchor relative, has to have entered the United States as a refugee or have been granted asylum, and it has to be within 5 years of their grant of asylum or refugee status. So say you get somebody who's here and they've been here 3 years, you missed the deadline for a 730, you might consider that they might be eligible for an AOR. The person that they're trying to bring has to be outside his or her country of origin. They have to be on a nationality included in the current eligibility list. Spoiler, all nationalities are included on the eligibility list now, so don't worry about that. They have to be registered with the UNHCR in a host country. So if they have not registered as a refugee yet, they are not eligible for the AOR. Again, you don't need to know this, you just need to know that this potentially exists. So here's the things I think about when I'm doing an intake for family reunification. I'm like, okay, they've been here 3 years. Is their person in their home country? No. Then I start thinking, oh, okay, AOR. So like what you need to think about when you're talking to somebody is, how long has it been within 5 years of arrival? And is the person registered as a refugee in a third country somewhere? That is enough for you to send at least an inquiry off to a resettlement agency and say, hey, I think this person might be eligible for AOR. It is absolutely our duty before we file something to make sure a person is actually eligible. They have to be in a country, just so you have all the info, but not feel like obligated to remember all this. The beneficiary has to be in a country where the refugee processing is currently taking place. Refugee processing does not take place in Iran, Afghanistan, or a couple other places, Yemen, or any EU country, or Norway. So they can't be there. And they have to be what we call an immediate relatives, parent, spouse, minor, unmarried child. So same as, well, a little bit different. You can file an AOR for a parent, but you can't file a 730 for a parent. Okay, spoiler, open to all nationalities and SIVs. These are the countries where you can't process. So if they're in Syria, sorry, we can't process. They're not going to be eligible for an AOR. But again, I would argue that this is the duty of the resettlement agency to suss out whether they're actually eligible beyond that. So just know that that's potentially an option, but it's not a thing where I think you need to get into the weeds on it at all.
Is this only for relatives that, for whatever reason, are not included on the 730?
Right, or you missed the deadline somehow. Like they come to you and they don't realize they have to file it within 2 years and you don't have a good excuse and it's been 26 months. Or they want to bring their parents because you can't file a 730 for parents. So if they want to bring their parents, the AOR is the only option, really. The AORs do come in as refugees. So we do process them and provide initial services. Okay, oh yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm pretty new to this whole space, so this question might be
No dumb, okay.
I'm Josiah, by the way, from
Nice to-
Hanover, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So
He's the only one that followed the rules, guys. Good job, Josiah.
Garrett did.
Oh yeah, Garrett did. I'm sorry, Garrett. Okay.
No, okay, so if they want to bring a parent, they could potentially go the AOR direction. Does that have to be outside the 2-year window, or they
No.
start that within?
Yeah, if it's day 30 and the parent meets the other qualifying requirements.
So CWS should know that, right?
CWS should know that.
Because I was operating a client who wants to bring a parent. She's been here for 10 months. And
Do people always know the things they should know? No.
okay, fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I have some of my cards here with me. I can give you my card. You can email me, and I can intervene with CWS if you'd
Thank
like.
you. That would be
Sure.
awesome.
I also have stickers today that say Refugees Welcome on in the state of Indiana. So if anybody would like a sticker, I'd be happy to share it with you. Okay, let me tell you about Afghan parolees and their family reunification option. So the DS 4317, it was taken out of commission for a little bit. It's back on, I think. So this is a family reunification assistance for Afghan parolees who are in the United States. So it offers departure assistance only to Afghan beneficiaries. So they have to be their spouse or their unmarried children under the age of 21. It is not a fast pass to entering the United States. So it is a flight out of Kabul, likely to a third country like Qatar, where then they will get in line for refugee processing. So it is not like here, Qatar for 3 days, and then they're in the United States. So it is an option. It's the only option we have right now for those who are in this kind of limbo parole status without an SIV approval or a green card approval or an asylum approval. They have to have a valid passport to travel, but not to apply. The issue with this is that Afghanistan is controlled by the Taliban. The Taliban is charging inordinate amounts of money, and it's taking forever to get Afghan passports. So really, if they don't have an Afghan passport already, it's going to be difficult for them to complete this. I'm happy to apply and let them know that they're going to need it.
Does that have to be unexpired too?
Yes, because the explanation of this is the U.S. waives passport requirements all the time, right? But they're not coming directly to the U.S. They're going to a third country, and Qatar may not waive the passport requirement. Like, we cannot force Qatar to waive the passport requirement for an individual. Then theoretically, like all refugees, they would be subject to the Border Patrol's whims and fancies at the border. So they come to Chicago, they fly in, they're coming in under this DS 4317. They say, you paid money to the Taliban? Nope, you're not coming in. They paid money because they had to get a passport. So that's still subject to that benefit. But I think it's really, really, really important when we're talking about this option that we're just talking about evacuation flights, essentially. They did resume flights last week. The flights had been paused since June. There were 2 evacuation flights out of Afghanistan last week that I'm aware of. I listened to a weekly call for legal service providers related to Afghans, and the report we had from USCIS was that there were 2 evacuation flights that came out of Kabul last week, and I believe they went to Qatar, but I could not, don't quote me on that. So that's really the limited option we have for Afghans at the moment. We can do Afghans, 730s once they're approved for asylum. The thing I want to mention, I don't think there's like an Afghan-only session, but let me tell you this thing. There was a lawsuit filed by the National Immigrant Justice Center out of Chicago, which is going to force the adjudication of Afghan asylums. So I don't have the numbers right in front of me, 50% of them have to be adjudicated, meaning approved or denied, by the end of October. 65, they were statutorily supposed to have been adjudicated within 150 days. It has been way more than 150 days. My office filed about 140 applications for Afghan asylum. We've had 11 approved. We haven't had any denials, thankfully, but we've had 11 adjudicated. 65% have to be adjudicated by the end of the year, 90% by the end of January. So I anticipate a great need for 730s filed out of Afghanistan because they've forced the hand. To date, of all of the applications filed for asylum for Afghans, there was something like 17,000. There's only been 75 denials. So most Afghans are going to get approved for asylum, which is great. We like that. It's wonderful. I think if you have Afghans in your area, you are going to see a request for 730 family reunification, which is fine. So does that stress people out? Uh-oh. Okay. We talk. It's fine. You'll get really good at all the Afghan documentation. So, yeah, call me and I'll talk you off the ledge. So, Serena emailed me last year and I tried to be helpful. So I want to offer that to everybody. I'm going to give you my card. You are welcome to email me at any time with any questions. Primarily do humanitarian work. I don't know anything about employment-based immigration, but none of you probably do that anyway. But I have touched a fair number of U visas, VAWAs, and Ts and things like that too. So. Okay, so that's all I have for my presentation, but I think we still have like 7 or 8 minutes for questions. So what other things did I not cover that you'd like to know or anything? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question on the area thing that you mentioned. I'm Dave from Minnesota.
Good job, Dave. Thanks.
If we're saying that it's not necessarily the home country, but their home period, their home area, okay, why is this
In relation to what?
refugee and asylum?
Okay.
You said it doesn't necessarily.
Oh, when they're displaced, they're not displaced from, if they're, okay, I'm following, sorry.
How is that convention not applying to Mexico when somebody can't go back to
Right.
a section
That's a very good question. Because the US has a bias against brown people from Central America, it is not effectively applied across the board. I have such a heart for the Central American people and the Mexican people to just, watch their countries just dissolve, but I don't know the answer to that other than it's bad policy and it's not effectively applied. And there's a lot of litigation to try to change that, but you literally have to litigate one case at a time in order to change the law. So, but it's a very good question. And one I suggest you call your US congressman or senator and ask them why they aren't doing their job. So, do you have a question? Okay, sorry, I thought I saw you raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead.
So, a couple months ago, there was a big human trafficking ring that was discovered in our town. So, I have clients that have called, and they're saying, and I don't know, I mean, I've done some research on human trafficking. However, they're telling me that there's like a report we have to give from HSI in order to apply for anything from them. So, I'm like, what's like the difference between the process with the U visa and human trafficking?
Well, okay, so a U visa is for a victim of violent crime, right? And you always have to have what we call Sup B, right? A certification from law enforcement that the person's been helpful and been the victim of a crime. It's not strictly required in a T visa, but it's a good idea. Certified victims of trafficking are eligible for additional services usually from resettlement orgs. So if HSI, that's probably the report that they were a victim of trafficking, and you probably need to submit that with your application for your T.
And how soon can something be applied for? Because I've read like 3 months and then I read to like
I would wait.
process, but the investigation report.
It depends on when law enforcement's willing to sign the report or sign the supplement. So it depends on each law enforcement agency. So like in Indianapolis, the police will sign it as soon as the investigation's done, but the prosecutor won't sign it until the case is either at a standstill or, the person's, if they can cooperate and testify still, they don't want to sign it until they do that. So.
Yeah, because I talked to the HSI investigator and he said he's willing to.
Yeah, so I would go ahead.
be signed, so
Yeah, because T visas can take a while. I mean, not as long as U's, but they can take a while. So I would go ahead and do it. Yeah.
I know Homeland Security is giving them, there was like over 70 victims.
Oh, wow.
And they're giving them like funding and food stamps. Stuff like
Right.
that.
So it sounds like they're a certified victim of trafficking. So yeah, I would go ahead and apply now. If they're certified, that you've done one of the hurdles already of proving that they're a victim of trafficking, right? Because they've already been certified by a law enforcement agency that they're a victim of trafficking. Right.
That's who I talked to.
Yeah.
He said he's willing to do whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. And then I have people calling the office. I'm like, well, I need to figure out first
Yeah.
what to do. Yeah. How to
Yeah.
do this, 'cause I really don't know.
Yeah. Awesome. Sure.
Someone from Boston. What is your best recommendation for more of a partnership? What American Connection and resettlement offices how we can partner more? Obviously, like we talked about, like people at the airport, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
From our end, how can we do?
Yeah. So not all resettlement orgs have legal services departments. So to the extent you're able to help do green cards for refugees and 730s, I think that's a real advantage. Yeah, I know helping to provide legal services is really, that's one of the biggest needs of resettlement agencies in general, and there really just aren't that many that have their own legal departments. So that would be my biggest recommendation, is just calling them up and saying, hey, do you have a legal department? If not, and the fact that you charge should not be a problem. You just need to let them know. Just say, hey, we charge a little bit for our services, but if we can be on your referral list where you send extra, because I have all these clients that I welcome that I have to serve, but then I get about 1.5 billion phone calls from the community that also want our services. So we have a list, including some of our Immigrant Connection folks, if they're from the northern part of Indiana, saying you can go talk to one of these folks and see if they're able to help you. So also trying to get on their list of referrals, I think, is a good thing. Yeah, sure.
If someone comes in as a refugee from Venezuela, but they have a parent who is overseas in Trinidad and Tobago, in addition a sister with a single
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
So there's no option for the sister.
There's not, no. You know, chain migration, the parents could get here and then potentially petition for the sister, but that's not once they become a permanent resident. So it's a while down the road. But unfortunately, no, there's no good options for siblings. There's no options for cousins or, you know, nephews and nieces or grandchildren either, unfortunately. So, yeah, you're welcome. Anything else I can answer? We've got 1 minute. Okay. All right, well, I'll be up here with my cards if you would like one. Thank you so much, guys.